And we're live.
Okay. I'm Paul Kirby, a reporter with the Daily Freeman, and we are set to do another live stream event here in the Daily Freeman offices in Kingston. And we're here with Congressman Antonio Delgado, and we appreciate very much that he's come to show up and answer some questions.
Absolutely. Good to be here.
Good. Congressman, we give people who participate in these live streams a little time to introduce themselves and perhaps talk about some of the things that they've accomplished in their term in office. I know this is your first one.
Yes.
In the first year, and it's been active in Washington, D.C., and you've been active around the state. Reading some of the clips and your webpage. But go ahead, talk to the folks about what you've been doing.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. It has been quite the year for me in my first term. We set about pretty early on trying to do a couple things. One was to make sure that people on the ground in this very big district, bigger than Connecticut and Rhode Island combined,
Yep.
11 counties, nearly 8,000 square miles. In fact, the 8th most rural seat of any member of Congress, entirely of Congress. How do we get out there and connect? I think a lot of people are feeling disconnected from what goes on in Washington. There's a lot of dysfunction there. I think people don't believe anymore that our government genuinely reflects the will of the people. And so trying to restore integrity to the system in part involves me going to the ground and communicating with folks on the ground. That's why we were able to do 3 town halls in all 11 counties in 2019. We're up to 34 now, making sure that everybody out there, irrespective of party affiliation, has my ear. And that's not just about making sure people feel connected to the work, but also it helps me understand what I have to accomplish once I'm in Washington. I have to take the community with me. And because if you don't, what ends up happening is in DC, you can get lulled to sleep a little bit, and you end up focusing on things that are not really relevant to the needs of your constituents. And so that's why staying home and being grounded through the town hall is important. We have 5 district offices, also very important. I have 4 locally based bipartisan groups, veterans, small business, ag, and healthcare. Again, this all helps me inform my legislation. And then there's the legislative piece. And making sure that as I engage with folks on the ground through the town halls, the farm business, I did 27, I think, farm business in 2019, small business visits, I take all that information and bring it back with me to legislate. We got 31 bills, if you include all of last year and the first 2 months in office, standalone bills that we introduced. 19 of those bills, bipartisan bills. 9 of those bills have passed the House. And 2 of those bills have been signed into law. I'm only one of 6 members of the House that can sit here and say that I have 2 or more bills that have become law. One of those bills, the Family Farm Relief Act, is a big bill that helps our small family farms here in the district. About 5,000 farmers, farms all across the district, not many of which are big or corporate ag. We're talking really small family farms.
Right.
And they're being squeezed out. And so this bill would make it easier for our farmers to file for Chapter 12 bankruptcy, which would allow them to get some of their debt reorganized, but remain operational and be stronger for it on the other end. The cap used to be $3 million. We bumped up to $10 million, which gives more relief. Not a panacea, but certainly something that's going to help our farmers. That's just one example of things that I've been able to get done legislatively. And I'll just say a couple more things, and then I'm happy to to take questions. The healthcare. I introduced the Medicare X Choice Act, which would allow folks the choice to opt into Medicare. If you like your private insurance, you can keep it. But this nonprofit actor within the private insurance marketplace would bring down premiums and bring down deductibles. I've also been very busy with broadband. We need a lot of it all throughout our district. I introduced the Rebuild Rural America Act, which would create a $50 billion multi-year block grant program exclusive for rural communities to tap into. And it would go straight from the federal government down to the state. So it would not go, to the town and the county level, not to the state level, to make sure that folks on the ground who are best equipped to make the investment in things like broadband, in roads and rail and bridges, have the chance to actually invest those dollars. Lastly, climate change is a big issue as well. I introduced the Green Jobs and Opportunities Act. And this bill would ensure that we are educating our young people for the jobs of the future. First, identify those jobs we have to be able to create and fill to get to net zero carbon emissions by 2050, and then create a pilot program to educate our young people in community colleges, high schools, and middle schools for the very jobs that we know we need to tackle the climate change crisis, but also to begin to create the green economy for our future. So just a handful of things that I've been able to do in the climate space. I can go on, whether it's the opioids, whether it's Lyme disease. We're very busy in this space, and I'll keep being busy to make sure that we are representing everybody's interests all across the district.
You mentioned the town halls, 34.
Yes, to date.
Okay. What are your what's the overriding theme that you're hearing at these town halls?
Well, I think the biggest concern people have right now is, how are we going to get things done? How's it going to happen? People are struggling right now, to gain confidence in the institution of our government, of Congress specifically. And so when you're talking about healthcare, when you talk about climate change, you're talking about broadband, all the things that I'm talking about, what are the ways in which we can solve these challenging problems? And right now, with all the partisanship and the divisiveness that is going on, a lot of people are concerned with who's there thinking about solutions, who's there trying to suss out common ground. I think people are also concerned about the over-influence of money, which is corrupting the system as well, and driving an agenda that does not reflect the will of the people. So I think those are some critical pieces. Obviously, you have your issues that matter too. Healthcare is a big one that comes up. Broadband is a big one that comes up. Our debt comes up. $22 trillion debt, the largest in this country's history. And I think people intuitively understand that when you are harboring or carrying that kind of debt, it makes it very hard to invest in critical needs, whether it's investment in infrastructure, whether it's investment in workforce development, whether it's investment in childcare, without growing the debt some more. Yeah. And so we feel we are at a critical tipping point right now. I'm trying to figure out, how do we make a way? But to make a way for the future, you have to invest dollars. And the question is, where do those dollars come from?
Right. Okay. We'll start with some of our questions, and then we'll get to a reader who asked a couple of things, a couple of readers. Anyway, so again, you're serving at a time in it's almost historic, and you participated in an historic vote by impeaching the president of the United States. Your first term in office, yes. Your first political service, and we know how you voted and we know why. But what did it feel like? What was your feeling going into that vote? And did you have discussions with colleagues or your family about this? What was your temperament?
Well, I will say this. When I decided to run for Congress, I did not run to impeach the president. That wasn't the objective. Right. The objective was to figure out how we can get back to the business of government committed to really serving everybody, uplifting the public, the general welfare, as it says in our Constitution's preamble, promote the general welfare. As a child of upstate New York from a working class family, parents worked for GE, having lived a story of upward mobility and having seen that narrative come under siege for way too many generations behind me, I felt compelled to come back to the community that raised me and my wife, and to give back in a meaningful way. That's what's been weighing on me ever since I was lucky and fortunate enough to become the congressman for this district. As it pertains to the impeachment vote, I had to vote my conscience. And ultimately, where you go in that space is inward. You reflect on, how your parents raised you, the morals they instilled in you, and you tap into that, and you hopefully are in a position where the community understands that while there may be disagreement one way or the other of how it should have went, yeah. You were true to who you are, and there was no attempt to do this any other way but to be completely accessible, to be accountable to the people, and to be honest and forthcoming about the decision. From that point on, the work continues, right? The work continues. I continue to legislate. I continue to serve my community, irrespective of party. I continue to show up and serve and listen, and seek out opportunities to find common ground. And whether that's, supporting the USMCA, whether that's having my farm bill signed by the president, continuing to figure out ways to serve everybody to the best of my abilities.
You move on.
Well, you have to do the job.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you do. You do the job. And the job requires you to be attentive, to be accountable, to be transparent, to be fair, to be respectful to all different points of views, and then to take all of what people have brought to bear. And this district is very special in that it's politically diverse. It's a third independent, a third Republican, a third Democrat. So if I'm going to do my job the right way.
We read something the other day, right? Leaning sky blue.
Listen, the political calculations and all of that, I don't really spend my time thinking about. What I'm talking about is just purely the makeup of the district. And it is unique in that regard. Third independent, a third Democrat, a third Republican. And what that does, unlike other districts that might be super red or super blue, is that it challenges me to figure out where the common ground might lie. And I think that's why I've been as active and effective as I've been able to be, because I'm motivated and inspired by, the folks that I represent, and understand that to do this job to the best of my abilities, I have to be able to tap in to that diversity of thought. And we can't celebrate as a country our diversity and call it a strength on the one hand, but then be dogmatic when we are confronted with a diverse point of view. We've got to be able to do both, which is to both celebrate our diversity, but also recognize that in doing so, it requires us to listen to each other and to process the information to maximize our full potential.
There are, and I know you like to talk about the local things, but a lot of news going on in Washington, D.C. these days. And one is the Attorney General, Bill Barr. 2,000 former employees of the Justice Department have signed a letter asking for his resignation. Do you think he should resign? And if he doesn't, should he be impeached?
Well, what I think is that the AG's behavior at this point is highly questionable, warrants some oversight. And I would suspect that the committees of jurisdiction will do just that. I think it does speak a lot to the fact that we have over 2,000 prosecutors who've come out. He is clearly doing things that appear to be a personal nature vis-a-vis his relationship with the president, as opposed to simply taking an objective point of view as it pertains to the rule of law. The DOJ is not the personal law firm of the president. And it's unclear time and time again if Barr fully appreciates that fact. I know he came out and suggested recently that it would help him do his job if the president wouldn't tweet. I would hope that it would help him do his job to remember what his job fundamentally is. And what his job fundamentally is to uphold the rule of law. No one is above it. And he certainly has taken steps that raise concerns. And I do think it's important that we have appropriate oversight.
Okay, so you're not to the point yet where you can say definitively, like these 2,000 people have, that he should resign. I think these guys are saying he should resign.
I think given the role of Congress, I think given that we do have oversight responsibilities, and given that part of our job is to collect facts and evidence and get to a place where you can make an informed decision that is not based on just information that we're gleaning from news accounts. I think we have a responsibility before we just start saying one way or the other to take those appropriate steps.
Okay. Again, back to the town halls. 34 of them. That's a lot in a year, right? As you mentioned that the 8,000 miles.
8,000 square miles.
8,000 square miles. And you had one in Ulster County. I think it was Highland, right?
We had one in Lloyd. We've had one in Saugerties.
Right.
We've had one in Ellenville.
We have some people wondering when there's going to be one in Kingston.
Well, we're working on it.
Yeah.
It's a big district. And I try to get out there as much as possible all throughout the district. And to also go places where, to be frank with you, where people might not expect me to go. And make sure that I'm connecting with people who typically don't get, elected officials coming in or doing town halls. I think it's important to do that work. So I love Kingston. And my wife went to Kingston.
Supporters of you.
My wife went to Kingston High School. She's a graduate.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Okay. Absolutely. So, this is a second home for me, right? So I understand that and appreciate all of that, but also recognize that this is a big district, and I have to get out there in Delaware County, Otsego County, Schoharie, Greene, all the counties that make up this wonderful, all 11, Broome County. So we have to make sure that we're doing that work, and it's so important. One thing I want to say too that I think is important to know, particularly in these very divisive times. I know it's hard, and I know there's a lot of the dynamics out there.
Yeah,
I've done 34 town halls, and we have gone to places where maybe that location didn't support me, or whatever the case might be, or it's leans more Republican than it does Democrat. And we get folks of all political stripes that come to these town halls. And out of all 34 town halls that I've done, I cannot tell you that there's been any instance, I can highlight not a single instance, I should say, where somebody has come there to be disruptive or has attempted to be disruptive. There have been times where certainly you might have questions or points of views that I might not agree with, but there's never been a time where we've disagreed and done so in a fashion that wasn't civil. Mm-hmm. People are coming and they're showing up in large numbers, and we're having good, thoughtful dialogue about a host of issues. And the issues that we're focusing on are meaningful issues, substantive conversation, and it speaks volumes to this district. One, the level of engagement, which I think is imperative if our democracy is to have true life. The lifeline, the lifeblood of democracy is engagement, right? Participation. Right. So to have that is instrumental, but then to be able to have it in a diverse fashion is all the more powerful. And so to have that happening at every single town hall that I've done is truly remarkable. And I really applaud and appreciate the constituents all throughout this district.
You are running again for another term, 2-year term. We recently checked your filings with the Federal Commission, and you got more than $2 million as of January. What would you say about that? That dwarfs anybody else so far.
Well, I mean, my point of view on this is to make sure that I do everything I can to keep my mind focused on the work here on the ground. Yes, you have to raise money, obviously, if you want to run. Right? That is a necessary reality of this occupation, unfortunately. Yeah. But your comment is interesting when you're questioning. To the extent that I have anything to say about it, what I have to say really boils down to my job, and my job is about making sure that as long as the good people of New York 19 keep me in this seat, to serve them, and to serve them with all my might, and to bring to bear a level of representation that I think is lacking in much of our government. So that is my focus. Whatever happens in the months to come will happen. But for me, what's important right now is to ensure that the good people of this district understand that I care about them, that I love them, and that I want to really help them and their families thrive all throughout this region.
A number like that just shows support.
Well, yeah, I mean, it certainly helps to have people who want to support you. There's no doubt about that. And I am incredibly grateful for that level of support. Absolutely.
This next question has to do with ICE. There was just a thing today.
It was on the New York Times had a report on that the federal government is instituting basically the ICE tactical units deploying into sanctuary cities like New York and some in California. Kingston happens to be one of them. And last year,
the ICE did kind of swarm into Kingston, and so much so that the mayor of the city posted a pamphlet on the city's Facebook page instructing undocumented immigrants what to do if approached by ICE people. That got a lot of back and forth. So I guess the question to you is, what do you think about the federal government sending almost SWAT teams into sanctuary cities? And then what the mayor did with the was that a proper thing to do? What do you think?
It's very alarming what the administration is doing around the question of immigration. Right, just stepping back and thinking about the ways in which the president has, in my estimation, used this issue in incredibly unhelpful, counterproductive way. We're talking about the zero tolerance policy that he's employed. We're talking about child separation that ultimately we were able to stop. We're talking about the inhumane conditions that I was able to see firsthand at the border. We're talking about the metering policy. And yes, we're talking about the aggressive tactics ICE have employed, specifically targeting upstanding individuals with no criminal backgrounds, who've been voluntarily paying their taxes, who are contributing positively to our communities all throughout this district. And so, yes, I think there has been energy, a dark energy that has been created around this issue. And the question is, to what end, right? What is the end? What is the objective when, rather than talk about this issue in a more humane and compassionate way, rather than see individuals as our fellow human beings, and many of whom are just seeking a better way of life and have done so for years. I mean, think about the fact that we haven't even got the Dreamers Act through yet. Young people who have grown up here their entire lives, who serve our country with honor, are being treated in this fashion. So we have a lot of work to do, and the president has done nothing really to advance the ball. Security and securing our borders is a one thing, and we certainly need to be doing those things. But the notion that we have to be inhumane to do so, the notion that we have to tap into xenophobic tendencies to do so, is something that I find incredibly unacceptable. So absolutely think that we have to be
deployment of the SWAT people.
Yeah, I think that is a bridge way too far.
Yeah.
A bridge way too far. We have got to be in a place where we take serious stock about the ways in which this agency is being used and deployed by the administration, who, in my opinion, is utilizing this issue in a way that is more about driving a wedge. And this is the issue that I think is important to understand. The way that we have to get to a place to establish economic security in this country. This is an important piece, right?
Yeah.
Economic security. There's a lot of stuff out there about unemployment level being low, and it is low. But the kind of jobs people are working, right? Part-time, multiple jobs at one time, they're not enough to keep up with the cost of healthcare, the cost of housing, the cost of transportation, the cost of education. You list it, it's not enough. People are struggling to get by. 2/3 of folks in this country are living paycheck to paycheck. Nonetheless, the wealth is growing in this country. It's growing. The economy has doubled in size over the last 40 some odd years. Wages have gone absolutely nowhere during that same period of time, even though productivity has increased. So where am I going with all this? Well, when you have all this pot of wealth that is being generated, but no one is actually seeing the fruits of it, no one's actually experiencing of it, you have a perceived sense of scarcity. You have a perceived sense of, we have to close ranks. We have to turn tribal. Because at that point, people start fearing for loss or fearing of loss. So when you think about the ways in which the administration at times has used this issue of immigration, I would argue, unfortunately, I see it as a tactic to distract us from the reality that we're not sharing in our prosperity, that a small group of individuals, of well-connected and very powerful people, have been able to concentrate wealth at the expense of a great many of individuals all throughout this country. And so we've got to be able to break that grip.
So we'll do this immigration thing so that people will, I just want to make sure I'm clear about this, that we'll drive this wedge, make this wedge so that people will pay more attention to that than they will, the economic
talk about
disparity.
Right. People, here's the thing. Yeah. You ever try to have a conversation, or a rational conversation, when you're hungry? It's hard, right? When your basic needs aren't being met, you get distracted and you're thinking about just your own needs.
Yep.
This is the same kind of dynamic. When people are struggling, to get by, 40% of the country living hand to mouth. Think about that. Okay, the top 1% own about 29% of all the wealth. And if you're thinking about the Great Recession, 95% of all the gains post the Great Recession have gone to the top 1%. Meanwhile, we have a tax bill, 83% of which goes to the top 1% in 2017, right? Adds $1 trillion to our deficit. So then what do we start hearing? Oh, we got to cut Medicaid, we got to cut Medicare, Social Security. They're all on the chopping block now because we got to pay for that $1 trillion deficit that was added by the tax bill. People are living these lives and they're experiencing this scarcity. And they're trying to figure out, well, how can they protect themselves, rightfully so? And then there are individuals who understand that and say, rather than figure out how we can reform our system appropriately and ensure that people share in their prosperity and make proper investments in infrastructure, which has a return on the investment, by the way, or workforce development or education or healthcare, right, or childcare, all these things we could be investing in, which has a return on the investment. We have other politicians who say, rather than do that heavy lift, we'll do the other kind of lift, which is to demagogue the issue, right? Which is to engage in racial provocation and xenophobic. Right? I think we culturally have got there politically. Mm-hmm. I don't even want to locate it in just one person. I think we have got to a place where this has become the norm. People have ascended to power through divisive means. And what's scary is we are an incredibly diverse country. But what it's done, this divisiveness has done, is made us dig our heels in our own camps and become even more and more dogmatic about our point of view. And
on both sides.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that there's been a real absence of mutual toleration. You know, as a democracy, there are certain norms that you want to be able to abide by for the sustainability of democracy. And one of those norms is mutual toleration. The first assumption, the basic assumption, is that we're fellow Americans. If I start calling you a traitor or my enemy, then we stop having mutual toleration. And your point of view is, I can't even tolerate it. I can't even tolerate your presence.
You see that a lot.
You see it a lot. And it frustrates communication. It frustrates being able to solve complicated problems. And it's not just, toleration, it's restraint. We have to be able to restrain ourselves too. And I think right now we're being driven a lot by pure emotion. And I get it because it's a tough time that we're in right now. It's very tumultuous. But cooler heads can prevail. And I think it's important that we step back and remember who we fundamentally are and what our principles are as a democratic country.
Some of these issues that you talk about just now have been brought up on the campaign trail of your fellow Democrats running for president. Do you have a particular pick at this time?
I don't. I don't have a particular pick. I think consistent with everything I just said, what I'm trying to really identify, and it's a competitive primary. I went through a competitive primary. I know something about competitive primaries, and ultimately they do help each candidate. You're forced to really go inward to figure out what you're about and what you want to communicate. I'll say that a few things that I'm concerned about from whoever the nominee might be. I think it's important that person be authentic and be genuine and be true to who they are. I think a lot of us across the country are just tired of politics as usual. We're tired of the thumbs up and the wink and the smile. We're tired of the surface level conversation and the talking points. I think people are okay if you make a mistake here or there. You stumble on your words, whatever the case might be. Just be real. Just be genuine. Be honest. Mean what you say what you mean. I think that's one of the key pieces. The other piece, though, is who can bring us together. Who has the capacity? Who has the demeanor, the disposition, the experience to help us familiarize ourselves again with our shared values, right? Our shared principles. And this is no easy task in this environment where you do have so many competing views and you do have more and more individuals digging their heels in and constituent groups digging their heels in. So I don't envy anybody who's trying to figure out how best to do that. But I think it does start with being authentic. I think it does start with just being true to who you are. And then from there, hopefully that is a window into how to bring people together.
Some of your fellow Democrats have said the one biggest thing one of these candidates has to have is the ability to beat President Trump.
Well, yes, that is a big issue. If you can't do that, that is a problem, right? The objective, if you're running as the Democratic nominee, is to win, right? So the other way to put it is, You want
Well,
somebody
which one of
to
these?
win.
Which one? Yeah, right.
Right.
But
And
which
so-
one of these guys? Which one of these people? You know, the 5 or so or 6 can do that.
Right.
And
that is the
you
question.
haven't decided
That is the
on
question.
that.
No,
Yeah.
I haven't decided. I really haven't. I think it's still to be determined for me. I think, you watch the debates, I watch them carefully, because to me, a lot of it is not just, how they deliver during the debates, it's their organization.
Right.
You learn a lot about how somebody might govern based on how they run their campaign operation. You realize, the more and more they communicate, the more and more you get a sense of how committed they are to their point of views. So these are all things that are critical for a primary. I think a primary can really be healthy. I think the key, though, is just that when you have all these different competing versions of what the future ought to look like, there needs to be an awareness by the electorate to, one, not take this personal, number one, and to, two, understand that the mission here is to figure out how to restore some civility, some decency, some equity in the system again. And it right now, it just feels like we're in a very turbulent time. And it's a little bit chaotic and uneasy and angst, creating. And I think we have to sort of, as a collective, when we assess the different candidates, take a more calm and reflective and deliberative approach, and understand that the process matters too. The process. This is an important issue for me because people sometimes talk about just the end, right? And what they think is the right policy objective. And they view that as sort of an end in of itself, and the end is justify the means. I disagree. I think particularly for those of us who like to prioritize the truth and the fact-finding endeavor, you've got to allow the process to breathe. You've got to allow different points of views. You got to, test them out, but you got to let it happen. And if you don't, then you're really not going about it with an open-minded perspective. Even if you think your ultimate end game is one grounded in open-mindedness, if you don't allow the process to unfold as such, then you're kind of undermining the very thing you say you believe in.
And that has occurred, as far as you can see.
I think it is a tendency to happen again across the political spectrum.
Yes.
I think it is a reflection of the climate that we're currently in.
Right.
And to be clear, who hasn't helped? Media hasn't helped in this regard. I think that the way we cover the news, I think the way that we have clickbait and sound bites that are employed, it's frustrating, particularly if you're trying to be a thoughtful, deliberative, elected official. You want to be able to ensure that you're providing the public with the most accurate information and truthful and honest information you can. And too often I have found that the media is more concerned with controversy, more concerned with the soundbite or the headline that'll be clickbait, right, which is how ads are sold, and less concerned about providing the public with information. It's the fourth branch, right? And it's an important branch in that it's supposed to inform the public. We have only 17% of our young people in this country right now can discern fact from opinion. That says a lot about the state of our country and whether or not we have informed enough citizens to really uphold our democracy. It is a crisis. And I think we all have to kind of dig in here and make sure that we get back to objectivity and evidence-based analysis.
Okay. We have a question from a reader. This is from Paul Andresen of Saugerties. And he says he would like to thank you for coming to this forum. And then he says, when you were a candidate, you supported term limits. Do you still support term limits? And if so, what would be reasonable terms for the House and Senate?
Yes, so I definitely expressed the need for term limits, and I always would say, whenever I did express that support, that to me, if you're going to do the term limits, it'd be also important to extend, particularly for House members, the length of the term. 2-year terms are, to be very candid with you, brutal, particularly in this climate. You mentioned the fundraising piece. The fact that you have an entire apparatus now that is built to attack elected officials from day one, before you even cast a vote. Right, I was being attacked through TV ads and social media ads, and I hadn't even cast a vote. And so the capacity to have to constantly defend yourself and communicate, whether that's on TV or whether that's through mail or whether that's on social media, unfortunately, there's a cost associated with that. And so the notion that you are able to just commit every single bit of your time, as you ought to be able to the business of governing, which is what I try with all my might to do. I think if you had a genuine full term to do that, then we'd be better for it, but we don't. And I think it's important that as we think about extending or a term limit, we also think about a 4-year
extending the
actual term. I think it's a harder question to think about how many terms when the system is still only a 2-year term. But I don't think that it's appropriate for folks to just ultimately be in the office for 20 some odd years. I don't. Maybe appropriate is too aggressive of a term, but I don't find it particularly helpful. And I think it does clog up new information. It does clog up a freshness to the system, an agility to the system that I think is required for democracy to continue to grow and to improve itself.
So because of all the things you need to do, you almost have to be, if you have a 2-year term, I mean, this is like you're saying, I believe, there's just, you got to do some candidate stuff during that 2-year term, and you'd rather spend your time attending to legislative matters and constituents.
And to be clear, I have been, right?
Yeah,
31 bills and
right.
the town halls, and
right.
I've been, very busy in that space. I do think though that it would be dishonest to suggest that, we're not living in a system that puts tremendous downward pressure on individuals, given the role of money in our system. That's why I'm a big believer in overturning Citizens United. That's why I'm a big believer in making sure that we have ways to publicly finance or at least aid individuals of limited means to run for office. You shouldn't have to pay your way in to the system, right? So these are all critical reforms that I'm a big supporter of. And in the same vein, we have to do a lot to protect our electoral infrastructure. The fact of the matter is we have a social media platform that is allowed to run advertising, and again, that oftentimes isn't even grounded in fact, right? And so there's a lot of things we need to be doing, and there's the bill, the SHIELD Act, which I support, which would require that those platforms have the same standards as you have on TV and you have on radio. So all these things are critically important when it comes to maintain the integrity of our system. And term limits, no doubt. Also, the revolving door, where you have individuals who work in elected office and then they're out, and within a year they're right back, with a lobbying shop. Come on.
There's some rule against that, though, right? I mean, a time.
Well, yes, but we're trying to extend that. It's a cooling down period. It's not long enough.
Yeah.
HR 1, which I supported, would extend that, and also it would create independent commissions to draw districts, congressional districts. Right now, we leave that to the state in power, the party in power in the state to draw the districts. Well, what you end up getting are, gerrymandered districts, districts that are super red or super blue. You have the independent commission draw these districts. You have a better chance of having a more equitable, proportionate representation. And the congressperson then has to really dig in to understand the needs of the district. It doesn't have to appeal to just one side of the spectrum.
Jump to something else.
Hold on a second. How many 4-year terms would you support then?
How many 4-year terms?
If it was 4, how many would be appropriate?
I actually haven't.
You say 20 years is too much.
Yeah, I would say, how about, if you had a 4-year term,
right?
I would say, anywhere from 10 to 12 years total, right? So 3 terms, something like that. Right. I would think. You need time, right? You do need a little bit of time. I've got a lot of bills that I've introduced, a lot of bills. Some have gone through the House, but not the Senate. Some have made it all the way to the president's desk, but a lot are just waiting to get introduced, right, to the House floor for a vote or to get their way through committee. And that's a grind. You got other members, 40 and 35, all of us are trying to do the same thing. right? And so you do need time to develop relationships. You do need time to be an advocate for your district. And so I do think it's to build that in when it comes to ensuring that you are properly informed and best positioned to achieve what you desire when it comes to legislation.
Is there any movement towards doing the term limits, or this is kind of thing you think should happen?
You know, I think the short answer is there's not enough movement.
Yeah.
I think that it's hard to get a number of electeds to do something that they might perceive as limiting their power, right? I mean, it's kind of like asking the fox to guard the hen house, right? I mean, these are rules that we have to impose on ourselves, which I am all for. I mean, think about the government shutdown, okay? And the fact that we had the longest government shutdown in the country's history. And we had federal workers out there being asked to keep showing up to work and not get paid. And, you know, all the pain that endured. And I said I didn't want to take my check during this period as well, because at the end of the day, we were the ones, right? The government, you know, the folks in Congress were the ones who ultimately couldn't get the job done with the administration. There was a bill that I would support to make sure that never happens again. And by that, we'd say, listen, if you are unable to agree on a deal to prevent a shutdown, and by you, members of Congress and folks in the executive branch, you can't come up with a deal. Well, then we'll continue to keep the government open based on the levels that were bargained for the previous cycle or previous year, and you will withhold your pay in escrow until you figure it out.
Right.
Now, there was some chatter around that type of bill, but it ultimately didn't get anywhere because not enough members thought to themselves, well, that's, you know, it's challenging for people sometimes to get beyond their immediate needs. But I think we've got to be able to put ourselves, put our neck out there. That's what it means to lead. You got to be able, people are putting us in this position to be principled, right? To take those stands that we know are necessary for the integrity of our system. Because if we don't, people will stop, if they haven't already, stop believing in democracy. Right. That's a big deal. When people stop believing in democracy, when people stop believing that the government ought to be for the people and by the people, as opposed to just the select few or the elite few, wherever you want to frame it, then you have a tendency then for our politics to not be equitable in nature at all. You get strongman type politics, and the rule of law, you know, becomes a bit more fragile. And what does that mean for the folks who have historically been on the margins? What does that mean for people of color? What does that mean for women? Right? What does that mean for the LGBTQ plus community? Right? What does it mean? And I think it's important that as we defend democracy, what we're really fundamentally defending is equality, is access to opportunity, and is equal protection under the law. It's not just abiding by the rule of law, but it's being equally protected by the law. And that is a cornerstone of any well-functioning democracy. And the more and more people stop believing in democracy, the less inclined people feel to ensure that our laws are equally protecting everybody. And that's a very frightening place to be in.
Okay. We'll jump to another one. Under President Clinton, there was a ban on assault-style weapons. I guess it went for 10 years or so. Do you think that ban should be put back in place?
I think we have a lot of work to do when it comes to responsible gun ownership and reform on this issue. You know, I actually went to a pro Second Amendment right groups meeting. And it was a room full of individuals who are very ardent supporters of the Second Amendment. You know, things should be protected, undoubtedly. But I thought it was important for me to go into that space. Many of the individuals in that room were likely not supporters of mine. And in fact, I think a great number of them were supporters, you know, of the president. There were some who I think may have supported me. That's beyond the point.
Yeah.
The key was, how do we get to common ground? right? How do we get to a place where we ultimately can save lives? Because the numbers speak for themselves. You know, we have school shootings happening at a rate that is just not acceptable. We have individuals who are children are frightened to go to school. I've done countless visits with schools now, and I've come across so many young people, and the mental strain that they're being asked to endure because of the threat that one day their day might come, should frighten every parent across this country. So we have the universal background checks with HRA, which I supported. I'm a big believer in. To get that through the Senate, it's a shame that despite the fact 90% of this country ultimately doesn't want to get behind that, we can't. I think making sure that we keep military weapons of war out of our streets are critically important. When that ban was enforced, you did see the data speaks for itself. You did see a decrease in the amount of school shootings.
So why not do it again?
No, I'm not. Yes, I think I've already come out and said yes. Let me be clear. Yes, we should.
Okay.
But I think it's important to have a more, and this is the point about how we cover issues. I'm trying to frame this issue and take a more holistic approach to a very critical issue around gun safety and control.
Yeah.
An issue that implicates not just assault weapons, but also implicates the mental welfare of our young people. It also implicates safe storage laws. It also implicates red flag laws, a host of issues. But the question asked, respectfully, is one that is framed on a singular issue, which I'd argue is probably the most hotly contested issue on this whole spectrum of issues that we know we have to address.
Right.
So let's rewind back
I get
to
that,
my.
but I ask only because that's what
so let's rewind.
think
I understand.
work. Yeah.
But let's rewind back to the point I made earlier.
Okay.
About media and how it's important that when we're trying to inform the public about any set of issues, that we do so in a way that the objective is to provide a comprehensive assessment of where we are with things. So whether it's saying that the assault ban is appropriate, which I think it is, but whether it's also saying that in the event we're unable to get that done because we're living in divided times, and we can't even get universal background checks done, when 90% of the country believes we need to get it done, we take our eyes off the larger problem. And the larger problem is, why isn't it that we can't get anything done when 90% of the country ultimately wants it? I'd imagine that even the folks who aren't for an assault weapons ban, right, who aren't for that, would be mightily dismayed at the notion that 90% of the country can get behind something, and yet our government can't get it done. And so when you're thinking about how to build coalitions, when you're thinking about how to actually bring us together, right? And this is why the media and our electeds and everybody has a responsibility to think about how we present these issues in a fashion that, yes, you want to have the record, you want to establish people's positions, undoubtedly. But I think it's important that in doing so, we paint the full picture and we let the issue breathe. And we allow people the opportunity to speak to all the different dynamics to this issue. Because we're not doing enough right now in terms of personnel in our school to even be mindful of the signs sometimes that can lead to these outbursts or these school shootings. We're not putting our resources in this space to save lives, literally. And maybe that's an area where we can get things done. That could be an area that could save actual lives. And so, yes, I think it's important that we talk about all these various dynamics when it comes to, responsible gun ownership.
Not just a ban on assault.
Not just.
Right. Okay, we'll go to another one. This is from Vera Brennan of Kingston. And she wants to know where you stand on assisted suicide. In New York, as you may know, some Democrats are saying they are in favor of making assisted suicide or medical aid in dying legal right now. Others in the New York State Legislature are saying maybe it needs more study, and we're going to pass bills to make a study. But this reader wants to know where you stand on it. So,
I'll be honest with you. I'll be, candid. I sitting here right now, having not given a ton of thought on that specific issue, and it's an important issue, no doubt. I don't want to just provide an answer without really having thought through. I can see the argument both ways. I really can. And I think it's important that if I'm going to make a position on that, I really am in a position where I take some time to think through the evidence that's out there, the lay of the land, what's been written on this subject. But it's an important question. I'll certainly will take this question with me.
Okay, that's fair.
And follow up. And in fact, you should give me, what is the constituent's name?
I think it's Vera Brennan.
All right, Vera Brennan. So we'll reach out to Vera.
Kingston.
All right,
Yeah.
Vera, we'll reach out to you once I get a better grasp of this issue for sure.
One of the other big issues in New York State is I think you've opined on this before, but is the legalization of recreational marijuana. The legislature last year and the governor were unable to produce any legislation to pass that, but the governor has included it again in his budget. I mean, what's your position on that?
Yeah, as I've said, I'm support legalization of marijuana, both for medicinal purposes and for adult recreational use. I think that obviously you want to make sure that we're regulating it appropriately. I do think that there could be tremendous economic value in its legalization. And I also think that one of the things that I've heard from a number of banking institutions, in particular our community banks who are, trying to address this issue is, with the administration taking the position that it has, and yet you have states that have taken different positions.
Right.
There's a lot of uncertainty around lending, right? Lending for businesses or medicinal purposes or whatever the case might be. And so we, at the House level, introduced and passed the Safe Banking Act, which I was very happy to support, which would protect our banks from liability in the event they were to lend to folks who were engaged in the business of selling marijuana. So, right. Yes, I mean, I think.
But that didn't go.
No, we're still waiting to get that through the Senate. Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of bills, over 300 plus bills that have gone through the House and have not gone through the Senate. We're talking, things that really should get done. Prescription drugs, HR 3, that's still way to get through.
Was it? Yeah, and maybe I'm not educated enough about this, but is there any way that you, as a congressman or the House and the Senate together, could just legalize marijuana countrywide?
Well, we certainly could if we ultimately had both chambers that were able to agree on a set of regulations that would appropriately manage the legalization of marijuana. I mean, I think you certainly, you can choose every day what ultimately is a legal substance and what's not a legal substance. The question is, the question that I think speaks or gets to the heart of the issue is, or any issue for that matter, is what can we agree on? What can get done? Perfect example. The very first bill that I introduced, the Service Disabled Veterans Small Business Continuation Act. This is the very first bill that I introduced. It would do something whereby the spouses of service disabled veterans, in the event that their husband or wife passed on, the federal contracting preference would still continue to be held by the spouse, the surviving spouse. But in this current situation, it only does so under current law if the veteran disability was 100% connected to service, right? Oh, yeah. So if you have 20% connected to service, or 30, or 50, or even 80, the surviving spouse is out of luck. Now, when you hear that, you think that just sounds a bit ridiculous.
Yeah.
And that is exactly why we were able to pass this bill unanimously in the House. Unanimously. That means every single Republican and Democrat who voted yes.
They didn't have to have the 100%.
Exactly.
Okay.
Where's that bill now?
In the Senate.
Right. Can we get a vote on it? We have a bill that passed the House unanimously. So again, you got to step back and look at the big picture, right? There are a lot of issues, some more controversial than others. right? Some might argue that, trying to legalize marijuana is a pretty controversial issue, right? Again, just think about how we frame stuff here. So, but then think about what happens if you actually don't have controversial issues, where you have unanimity. You have people who literally think everybody agrees in the House, at least.
And you bring up that bill as an example.
And you bring it to the Senate, and it still goes nowhere, right? And so the question is,
why do you think that is?
Because of the rules. Because we have a lot of folks in Washington on both sides of the aisle, and this goes back to term limits as well, where you have hierarchy and seniority and committee assignments and all these things that I think have created a lot of buildup and a rulemaking process that concentrates a ton of power based on seniority and hierarchy. And so you can literally have just one individual dictate the fate of the entire country. When you have 90% of folks who say they want universal background checks, we have an H.R. 8 bill that goes through the House that reflects that, and yet it stops dead on arrival in the Senate. That speaks volumes, right? And we've got to get to a place where we get money out of politics. We got to get to a place where we take some of the corrosive and corrupting elements that are in our system out of politics and have more accessibility and transparency and accountability of those who we put in office. It's a shame. And it's not just a shame in the sense of, we feel sad about it or should feel dispirited about it. It's a threat to our democracy and the sustainability of our democracy. Again, and I think that's an important piece we cannot afford to lose sight of.
Okay, we got about 5 more minutes because we allow an hour for these things. And we know you're a busy guy, got other things to do probably. I know you were at the Dutchess Chamber of Commerce this morning.
Yeah, it's a good conversation.
But if you want to, sum up.
Yeah.
Your term so far, and what you expect to accomplish in the future if we're elected in November.
Well, I'm going to keep doing what I have been doing. There's going to be a lot of dynamics in play. We've been through a lot, from the government shutdown to the impeachment inquiry to, obviously there's not going to be a whole presidential race. A lot of things that are happening and ongoing at the national level that, are going to take a lot of folks' attention. My focus has been and will continue to be at every turn to do the work of the people of New York 19. I'm going to keep doing my town halls. I'm going to keep hoping that people show up. I'm going to continue to make sure that my team on the ground at every single district office is dedicated tirelessly to serving our constituents in every way, shape, or form. I'm going to continue to meet with my locally based advisory groups and expand upon that. We're working on an environmental one that I'm excited about. I'm going to continue to go to DC and be informed by the folks that I represent and to continue to fight for legislation that I think we can actually get through. Right. And whether that's focusing on healthcare, whether that's focusing on broadband, whether that's supporting our veterans, whether that's empowering our family farms, whether that's protecting the most vulnerable amongst us, whether that's ensuring that our children are being properly educated, that our teachers are being empowered as well. This is all a part of the puzzle for me of our democracy. And there's going to be a storm. We're in a storm, right? But at the end of the day, you still have to tend to the garden. And no matter what else is going on, you have to still focus on the needs of the community you represent. And that's what I intend to do for as long as the good people of New York 19 allow me to do so.
Congressman, thank you very much for coming by. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
We had a good time here.
Thank you, man.
Come back.
All right.
All right.